So I just wonder, first up, if you would just tell us how you kind of perceive non-ordinary experiences, these kind of like, like hearing voices, seeing audio, visual hallucinations, tactile experiences, how you perceive that through the IFS lens.
Yeah, well, it's not one answer to that question. There are
Great.
many different ways those things happen. For people that are having hearing voices or having delusions or hallucinations that are generated by their parts, the most common situation that I've encountered is where protectors are pushing the button for that phenomena for the same reasons that they make you get addicted to substances, or they're really just trying to keep you away from stuff in there, from exiles, or uh, sort of the same, keep you from functioning at a high level in your life so that you don't fail or get rejected, stay dependent maybe. So my take on it is, in some cases, the voice is actually a part that the client is mistaken for a voice, freaks out, and the psychiatric establishment sort of reinforces that and gets more extreme because medical issues in general, my belief is that we're born with genetic predispositions for certain conditions. So I have a gene for asthma and one for migraine headaches. And if I'm in a dusty room, I'll have a asthma attack, and it has nothing to do with my parts. But if a part wants to take me out, it can push the migraine button and I'll have a big headache. Now, that hasn't happened in a long time because I worked a lot with my parts, but it used to happen not infrequently. And I still get the aura sometimes, but almost never get a headache. So I believe that some people have that predisposition for psychotic kinds of experiences that are genetic in a sense, and that if a part wants to take them out, they can push that button. So the psychotic experience itself isn't necessarily a part, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Just like the migraine headache isn't a part,
Uh-huh.
it's a physiological thing.
Yeah.
But you can find the part that pushes the button, and then you can work with it so it doesn't do that. It's been my experience.
I felt you were going to say, and there's another thing that I thought you had said, that the voices, for instance, might be a part pushing a button to, give a voice or have some sort of hallucination, but it could also be something else. Is that right?
Yeah, well, there are people who have paranoid experiences, and it's really just a part that is really, really scared
Uh-huh.
and has blown up all kinds of things. And so you can actually talk to it as a part. On the other
Uh-huh.
hand, there are people that are having wild delusions and hallucinations, and you try to talk to those and it doesn't go anywhere. It's sort of like
Yeah.
you have to wait till they're not florid and then search around and find the part that pushed the button. I think that's the distinction I'm trying to make.
Okay. So I want to just, oh my gosh, you've just said about 5 things that I want to go to, but I was speaking to a lady, and she was saying, she tries to kind of like, with her voices, if she tries to rationalize with them, if she tries to like talk to them in a coercive kind of way,
Yeah,
then it's just, there's no
right.
logicking with them,
No,
right?
no,
But if she extends her self energy, just
that's right.
extends some compassion and care, then they relax a lot.
Yeah,
So you are right in the sense of you can't really logic, like if a part's really set on its belief, well, that's how I perceive those delusions. It's like, I believe psychosis is an extreme fear state. And so when you're in that level of fear, there's not much logic's going to help with, even
yeah.
talking to.
I'm also saying that in some cases,
Yeah.
uh, the psychotic episode, when the client is very florid, is akin to they took some kind of psychedelic and
Uh-huh.
they're just off on a trip. And personal experience, and also from clients, when say somebody's in high dose ketamine, you can't talk to them. It's just pointless.
Mm-hmm.
but then it recedes a bit and then you can talk to them. And so for some people, that's been my experience. But
Right.
other people, it's more like what you're describing. The voices, if you don't engage in their content and just show them that you're present, they don't need to do this, will calm down. Yeah.
Great. So that was my other question, is what do you mean by florid? So that sort of explains what you're meaning when they're just really that elevated, that much what I would consider to be fear. They're off in that state. It's like they've taken drugs. Their whole system is kind of,
Just like with the psychedelic, it's a biochemical kind of experience that was just set off by a part, but it's not the part itself.
that's interesting. I differ in that. I'm not sure that I would call it biochemical. I would just say something happened to trigger off this extreme fear state. And now the part is kind of off and running with that. And it just takes, like, I don't know about you, but when my parts get really triggered, it can take me 72 hours to just find a place of, or 48 or whatever that number is,
Sure.
to kind of get a little bit more settled, or used to. I'm a bit better at it now, but
Uh-huh.
and that's how I perceive it, as like my system just goes into, I feel nauseous, I feel quite like, like anxious.
Mhm.
But someone who goes into that level, like that level of fear where they're getting voices or seeing things, or they like literally paranoid, I think it's just a hyper nervous system activation that just can't settle for a period of time until there's some sense of safety again.
We're sort of talking about the same thing, I think.
Okay.
And then the other phenomena we haven't touched on is that some of these voices turn out not to be parts, but turn out to be what are called UBs, unattached burdens,
Okay.
little entities in there.
Yeah, great. I'm glad you brought that in here. So do you want to speak more to that, or?
I'm always reluctant to speak too much to it because I
Yeah.
don't want IFS to be written off, but it is a phenomena that you'll encounter if you work with this population. And in contrast to parts, these things, whatever they are, don't have any positive intention, and they're not part of you. They'll describe how they entered your system,
Yeah.
and they generally just want to do harm to you or to other
Mhm.
people. And they're not hard to unload once you find them. I've run into some people who'd been diagnosed psychotic who, it was just one of these scary UBs, and it was scaring them and
Yeah.
the helpers.
So UBs aside, so obviously that's something that um, people can speak to an IFS therapist about, right? So then my next question is, how do you perceive when someone is now become kind of chronic because of the fact that there's, so, oftentimes when you're having this experience, maybe it's a part who's giving a person a voice for their various reasons, right? Your parts push your asthma button because they're worried about something, right? These guys, their parts press the psychosis button because they want them to know something, right? I need you to pay attention to something, something's scaring me, I'm going to take you out. And what I found is that there's some sense of, I can work with that when it's right there. But then someone gets on 10 psychiatric medications, like
Yeah,
I'm working with
that's
a
right.
client at the moment, it's just been discharged from hospital and is on an absolute cocktail of drugs.
Right.
Yeah. So I wonder how you perceive working with that.
It is much harder. And the sort of dilemma you're in is if they cut back on the drugs, especially some of these drugs,
Yeah.
you cut back too quickly and all hell breaks out. So that's the dilemma. And yeah, the drugs work because they create kind of dissociative walls. They make it so you don't have delusions anymore, but you don't have access to much else in there, and you don't have access to much self, which is the big issue.
Yeah.
It kind of pushes self out of the body, so it's hard. And as the psychiatrist will tell you, getting off the drugs is really the delicate thing. Many of these clients do need to chill, and the drugs give them a bit of a breather,
Mm.
but after a certain period of time, it's start to inhibit what we can do with these clients.
I love that you're saying that, because I know that in Finland, where they use open dialogue, they'll medicate someone initially just to help them take
Yeah.
a break, like you said, right? Because
That's right.
and my perception is that fear state is so frightening. It builds
Yeah.
on itself,
Yeah, exactly.
and it's very hard for someone to come down from it once they're in it.
Yeah.
And so to have a break from it, to be given something that helps a person sleep, like sleep's a really big deal for someone who, like we all know, well, I don't know if we all know, but there's pretty good evidence that simply being sleep deprived will eventually make you psychotic.
Mhm.
So if you're already kind of someone who maybe goes into those states that are, really elevated or really frightened and you can't sleep, then you're tipping over just purely because of biology then, right? Because you're sleep
That's right.
deprived.
That's right.
So yeah, to come off the drugs slowly and with some help, and in a way, like you said, don't come off that tips you back into some big explosion, but to slowly, with some help with a psychiatrist or a doctor or something, with a lot of padding with the therapy is kind of, I think, really important.
Yeah, and part of the vicious circle that psychotic people are caught in is that whenever they do start to get off the drugs, their symptoms do come back often.
Yeah.
And then that proves that they have to be on the drugs for life. And if instead, and I've done this with several people, if instead you say, okay, let's get ready, it's all going to come back, and then we can work with that. And let's just jump in, and it's going to be a rocky road for a while. And we might have to do a number of sessions, back to back. See, part of the vicious cycle is the client has the symptoms and then freaks out about the fact they're having a symptom because that means they're crazy. And all the people around them say, yeah, you are crazy. And that adds to the fear. It was already a big cause of the symptoms. So just helping clients see it as a part, either the voice is a part or there is a part who pushed the button, and that you're not crazy, and we can just giving them that level of kind of empowerment is a big step in reversing that vicious cycle. But to do that, you have to work with a psychiatrist who's not going to freak out.
Yes, you do. That's a good point. Eleanor Longden, who's kind of done a fair bit of research in this space, has some quote that I don't have the actual quote, unfortunately, but I have a paraphrase, which is that there is something wanting to be known and then something wanting to be disowned, like to not be known. Right. And so that's part of the polarization inside. Is what I find is that in the session, there's a part saying something important. And then when you kind of go, oh, that's important, and go near it, it's like literally the person dissociates. And I'll just reference one of my mentors, Matthew Ball, who has a theory called dissociocotic. And he says that when you get close to something in the relationship, so that maybe the part has brought up, there is a part wanting something to be known, right? But it's fearful of it being known. And so it raises it. But then when you go close to it, it gets frightened. And then there's this dissociative moment that looks psychotic because something gets said that doesn't make sense. And so Matt would call that dissociocotic. And so like broadly, there's like what I call like a psychotic dance where something becomes known in the session, and then there is a dissociation away from knowing and almost like a disavowal of what just got said.
Yep.
And I wondered, for you, have you noticed that dance with people, and how do you kind of go close? Because I want to honor the fact that something was, a part wants it known and another part doesn't want it known. And I'm kind of trying to create some relational safety here to not go to close, not bypass protectors, right?
Yeah, well, I worked with that population for 20 years of severe abuse survivors. And that's just totally part of IFS, that there are these exiles that are stuck in the trauma scenes, and there are protectors who don't want you anywhere near them, and they'll do whatever it takes to take you out. And dissociation is one thing they might do, but all these protectors are determined in some cases to not let the secrets out of what happened and who did it, and in other cases, just to not have you re-experience any of that stuff. So we have exiles that are stuck in the scenes and carry all the feelings and also have the information about what happened. And then there's a whole host of protectors that are terrified that if you learned about it, then your life would be destroyed and you'd never see your parents again, and you would hurt your parents, or you would see what a evil person you were, or the therapist would judge you, or
Yeah.
we have our like 9 common fears that protectors have about going to exiles. So his theory is just one part of a much larger picture.
Yeah. And so
About
how do you work with that then?
IFS.
Because what I've found is that there's such it's almost like clients sometimes don't even remember they said it,
Sure.
or they literally will almost like the sense of like that's not true in the next moment is so
Yeah.
strong that even to
Yeah.
kind of go back there, it's like I found I just have to move on and just allow it to kind of pop up and fall away and pop up and
Yeah.
fall away until the system's ready to get it. Because I can't sort of go, there's someone here who's afraid, because like, oh no, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yes, that does happen. And at some point, ideally, you'll be able to talk to the part who denies it that way and just go over all of its fears about what would happen if it didn't do that.
Okay.
I hold out because I've had this experience. Some psychedelics can really help with this because they, for whatever reason, it puts those parts to sleep, and you can access a lot of self, and that invites these exiles in, and you can get the information without that, and then then you have to deal with the backlash. But
Yes. Yes. Okay. That's a whole other topic, Dick, because I know that by and large, all psychedelic programs that I've heard of exclude people who are having psychotic experience, have had psychotic experiences.
no, that is true, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the larger point is, ideally, you'll be able to ultimately talk those parts into allowing. And some of the negotiations is we don't have to know all the details. We just need to get that part out of there. We don't have to know whether it's true or not, for sure. We just, the whole thing is, let's do whatever it takes to get the exile out of there. And then later we can go over whether or not that possibly happened or not.
Yeah.
With the protectors having a voice. But as long as that exile's in there, the protectors are gonna have to do this job they don't like. And so I'm selling hope to these protectors all the time of a new role, and that we can do it without all the terrible things they're afraid. I'll say often, even if we get information, you don't have to do anything different in the outside world about it. It doesn't have to change anything. So
yeah. So I have a question then. I want to kind of use an example. So in every client that I've worked with, there's always themes of like good and evil, and the extremeness of like I am an evil person, and then almost like having to counteract the deep-seated sense of I am just bad to the core with kind of like a grandiose I'm good, like I'm praying all the time and angels help me, or I'm Jesus, or I'm on a mission to save, like particular population, or save all animals from extinction or something. And I wonder how you perceive that. Seems to be just a universal theme with people who are having these very large experiences.
I don't know, you mean psychotic people?
Yeah.
I don't know, universal. I haven't always run into that,
Haven't you?
but I have run into it. And so, in IFS, you have these exiles, and it's particularly true when you have exiles that there's a lot of terror about releasing because they have these secrets. Then you often have very extreme symptoms to keep them locked up, and you'll have parts that use shame and this constant, steady telling you you're evil
Yeah.
to hold people down so they don't even take that chance. So what are called inner critics, but generally they're even more brutal than typical inner critics. And sometimes they actually think that because of what happened when you were young, they blame you for, or they've been told that you were sexual or something and you're evil. Or sometimes there are firefighters who did things to hurt people in the past. And so this part took that to mean that you're evil.
Yeah.
You follow me?
Yeah. That's, I just want to pause a second and notice that, because yeah, that's something that's really hard. If the person themselves, a firefighter, has done something to hurt somebody, it's very, very hard at that point for, you know, like you say, maybe the exile holds a belief in there about being bad, and then they actually accidentally or purposefully did something that was hurtful. And now they've got all the evidence and there's no going back from I am bad.
Yeah. So anyway, that is pretty common, that particular part. And then, as you say, to counter that, often there'll be this grandiose part, or this savior part, that to atone or to redeem themselves will go extreme in the opposite direction. And it isn't even to prove that they're good. Often it's just to counter the evil.
Yeah.
And they do get very connected to evangelical kinds of religions
and like really radical diets or yoga practices, or you know, like yeah. Okay.
There's just this need to save themselves somehow.
Yeah.
So those parts that are really convinced that you're evil are challenging, and often I'll have to do a lot of direct access with them.
Okay.
And build a relationship with the part itself.
Yeah.
With me.
Okay.
And what are you afraid would happen if you didn't convince her she was evil all the time? And then the firefighter that did hurt people would come up, and if we could go to that part and heal it so there wasn't any danger of it doing that again, would you have to keep doing this? Some of them will say, no, I wouldn't, but I don't think you can do that. Others will say, well, no, I still have to because she's evil. And again, you don't want to get too much into the content and arguing with them about it. It's more just extending a lot of compassion and love, and then healing other stuff, and showing them that this can be done.
That's really helpful. I think that's a sticking point for me in my practice, is to just, extend compassion when it's like, no, we're not, because I'm so evil, to not get into the arguing and just really allow for us to go somewhere else. Right. That's beautiful. Thank you. There's also something else that I wondered if you would speak to, and that's just been, I had a client recently. I call it like the metaphoric language of psychosis, where we're here and we're talking about something, and I'll ask a question and then something gets said that doesn't really make any sense by itself. And I mean, I have a frame of reference for that. And I know when I work with people, for me, there's a certain thing I do, but I wondered, just for listeners, it would be helpful to hear your perspective about how do you frame it, and also how would you respond? So I had this client who kind of said, we were on a track of asking some questions, and then I had said, well, just ask that part. What is it afraid would happen, or whatever? And it said Sherlock. And I was like, Sherlock. and so I was kind of like, what does that even mean? That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And I just paused a second and I went, this is a metaphor for this person not feeling safe at the moment. And what a Sherlock is, he's an investigator. He's probing too much, right? He's a detective. And I said to this client, who's Sherlock? Am I Sherlock or are you Sherlock? And he's like, you are. And I'm like, okay, is this too intrusive?
Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So I wondered for you, have you had bumped up against that kind of metaphoric language where there's something that can't be directly said to you, but is being said and you have to listen in for?
Yeah, parts that don't think they can be direct with you will
Yeah.
do what it takes. And some of the time it's, I'm very frequently saying to protectors, just be direct and honest with me.
Uh-huh.
You don't have to give her a headache. You don't have to make her delusional. You don't have to dissociate. You, you can just tell us what's going on and we'll listen to you and we'll respect what you're saying. And that often works much better than you might expect.
Mm-hmm. Great. And the other thing I was going to say is I've heard you talk once before about the piece around nothing inside can hurt you. So can you just speak a little bit more about that with this population?
Yeah. So it's almost like self is, if you get fairly pure self, there nothing has any power. Nothing else has any power in there. Now, part of why some clients are so hard to treat is that the parts they're afraid of have really mastered the ability of keeping them scared. And so it's really hard to get them to pure self. But that line that, if you're not afraid of it, it can't hurt you and it doesn't have any power, I use a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And and so the follow-up to that is, so all we need to do is get these parts that are so scared into a safe, comfortable waiting room and ask them to just trust you and me to handle this thing. And if the, sometimes that takes quite a while, but
Yeah.
once it happens, it's never failed that we could do whatever we wanted to with the
Right. So when you
scary
say it
target part.
takes quite a while, how do you like see that? Can you pad that out a little bit for me? Like you might
How
have to
long?
work.
Or
Yeah, like what would you do then? Obviously, there's some objection, and then you.
I'm just going over the fears. What are you afraid would happen if?
Okay, yeah, yeah.
And a lot of that often comes down to the lack of trust they have in self and the lack of knowledge they have in self. So then you're using the, how old do you think she is? And no, she's not 5 anymore. She can handle a lot more than she could.
So this brings me to another thing that's just popped into my head is I believe I've done so much reading on this because I've really always wanted to understand. Okay. I actually think maybe, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I have a theory that maybe people who've been through the experience are best placed to actually work with these folks because they have a deep understanding of the experience. But anyway, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand it because I don't have that experience.
Mhm.
Um, and I read Bateson's double bind theory. And what I love about that is that part of the dilemma is that the client doesn't trust people, right? So they don't trust me, they don't trust the therapist.
That's right.
And so, if part of the difficulty in childhood was this, not, I don't know why I called it a double bind because it's actually kind of like a triple bind. That
Mhm.
like there's a message that child receives that there's going to be punishment if they turn up as they are. So they try and then alter themselves and maybe withdraw, but then they're not allowed to even withdraw because they're expected to have a response. And then none of the response that they give is ever adequate. So they end up having to kind of really cut off from themselves and lose themselves in order to be someone different. And anyway, that's my very, very inadequate explanation of how I perceive it. And so in the relational field with the therapist, it's almost like very, very hard for them to trust, this client that I'm working with, one of my clients at the moment kind of says, I don't believe you, Stephanie. I just don't believe you. I just don't trust you.
Well, yeah, it's hard to be convincing of these scared parts to trust self when they don't trust you.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a lot of the work initially with some clients like that is just, I'll repeat over and over again. I get there are parts of you that don't trust me at all, and they have good reason, and that's okay. My job is to earn your trust. It might take a long time. I'm going to keep showing up.
Yeah.
messages like that.
Yeah. So that brings me to my next point, because as you're saying that to me, I'm like, gosh, I do that with all my other clients, but this population, I end up getting a little caught in content a little bit too much.
Uh-huh.
So then therapist parts, just talking about our therapist parts, one of the things when I'm teaching this is that I'm very, very candid on the fact that I just have to work with my parts all the time.
Yep.
Just like, and sometimes I will literally after the session go like, why did I do that yet again? It's like that part was there again, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I just wonder if you have any words to say.
Just that, yeah, they make great what we call tormentors,
Mm-hmm.
with a hyphen between the tor and the mentor. So by tormenting you, they're mentoring you about what you need to heal.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm a very different person, because ultimately I learned to not let the part take over or, interfere, and instead to work with it with the therapists between sessions. And so I didn't take the bait over and over with these people. It takes a lot of work, and that's all very challenging. It takes a lot of patience, but it helps to know that that's just parts. It's just par for the course given their histories.
Yeah.
So that, we have the 5 Ps of the therapist's self-leadership, and that perspective is a big one with these kinds of clients. Having that perspective, it's just a part, and
Yeah.
it's not personal to me. It would be doing this with anybody that was sitting in my chair, and so on.
Yeah. That's great. And when you talk about the P's, I find there needs to be a little playfulness too. I don't know why.
Mhm.
Yeah, just
Well, a lot of times their parts are very cute.
yeah.
They're kind of fun.
Oh, I do have one final question. More recently, there's been a long study into and then paper put out called the Power Threat Meaning Framework. And they believe the formulation is really, meaning making and formulation are the key to recovery. And of course, in the IFS model, well, I would say that's absolutely what we're doing, right? The person
Mhm.
is really coming to understand themselves more deeply. But my question comes when their formulation is different to mine. I have the IFS framework, right? This
Mhm.
is what I think it's a part. And this person doesn't want to have it be a part because they're afraid of losing their autonomy.
Mhm.
They're like, oh gosh, no, I have to be in control of this. And I've kind of talked about the fact that, well, you won't lose your autonomy, you'll actually get more autonomy.
Right.
But yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, I mean that comes up, and the fear that it means they're crazy because voices have been so pathologized,
Yeah.
comes up. And a lot of it is, again, just the level at which they can trust you to take a risk. And
Okay.
I'll just say, I get it. And would you give me a chance to prove that it doesn't mean you're going to lose more autonomy? I
Mm.
promise you won't. And all I'm asking for is a chance to prove that. And uh, and it's your call. I don't pressure people. So
Yeah.
the protector is the boss, and if it's too scary, we're not going to do it.
Okay.
And they like that. They like they like hearing that one, which actually helps them relax and maybe play with it
Yeah. So what I'm really hearing is there is just a lot of steady self energy from you all the time.
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when there's not, I own it.
Hmm.
It's good to tell them I'm in a part. I'm sorry. Or I give my clients permission to bust my parts. So if they see that I'm not really there, I really encourage them to let me know.
Mm.
And I used to think, oh, they're psychotic. What do they know? But those people are really sensitive to your presence and when you're
Oh
there.
my
Yeah.
gosh, they are so sensitive to your presence. David Stern says that he has people who come in and kind of say to him, like, what's going on for you, dude? Because I can feel it. And he has to check,
Exactly. Right. No, that was me too. Because I would get defensive because I wasn't even aware myself.
Mm,
And then I'd check, and by God, they're right. So, yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dick. This has been really helpful.